From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you very much. The run to Christmas has begun. See, we've got, reindeer and stuff here. In the meantime, plenty of serious stuff to get to, including the story that should have been leading everywhere, but don't worry, I'm going to give it to QC Dreyfus, the Attorney General, in a moment or two's time in his disgraceful behaviour today. I associate myself with everything that's been said on the shows thus far this evening. But first, something far more important than the poor behaviour of a politician that history will never remember. Let's talk about our schools. Now, our schools, of course, are where our kids are supposed to go every day to learn, but we know that the state has already shown them that they don't have to go every single day, and even told them that it was healthier for them not to go to school than go to school. But, of course, they are the place where we all hope that the little people we bring into this world will end up coming out as better people and starting off in different and bigger lives, being able to achieve more than we could ever dream in our lives as parents or grandparents. And politicians know this. We know that there are people who move to certain parts of town in order to be near a good school to get a good start in life for their kids. It doesn't matter if it's state or federal, Labor or Liberal, they always turn up to talk to the kids. I'm invested in what you're doing. Well, I want to show you a class photo of the people that are currently running Australia. It was taken last night at the Lodge. Now, it's a very cosy gathering because all bar one of them are Labor. And most likely the minority government in Tasmania, well, it's kind of pretty left. It's Labor light. So essentially this is wall-to-wall Labor with Toto thrown in too. These are the people that are running our country. This is how unserious some of these people are. But the reason I want to start tonight's show is these people have direct responsibility for every single school in Australia, including independent ones because they get state funding as well. We all woke up to one story today that, again, in my view, is much more serious than the Dreyfus stuff. The OECD checks in with 15-year-olds and has for a very long period of time. Now, they have done a report, again, which they released today, which is about the state of learning and equity in education. The OECD is, of course, the Organisation for Economic Development. And generally speaking, while they're not the UN, they are across countries from Albania to Australia and many in between. And the results are yet again a disgrace. They are a disgrace to every politician who has served in our parliaments for the last 15 years. Because have a look at it. When it comes to high school kids reading, doing maths or science, Australian students have got worse every single year for the past 15 years. This is despite the fact that we have spent hundreds of billions of dollars, almost $1 trillion over that period of time, actually, of 15 years. Labor governments, Liberal governments, Gonski governments, non-Gonski governments, building education revolution governments, with multiple changes at the state level, all of them doing exactly the same thing, which is using our kids as props to get votes. But then when we actually look at the results of our education system, we are going backwards. We are going backwards at a rate of knots and have been for 15 years. Now, there's more in all of this. When you want to compare Australia in maths, reading and science to the rest of the OECD, you can see that Australia is below the average of many countries around the world in maths. The same with reading and the same with science. In fact, we learned today that Australia is now ranked 16 in the OECD in mathematics, 12th in reading and 10th in science. Now, I have never hid from the shameful truth that I was appalling at school. But I want to make sure that the school system that is educating my children, your children, or maybe your grandchildren, produces better results than what it produced for me. And I am happy to live in a country that if you are lucky enough to be paid a certain amount of money, then the government takes a certain amount of tax and it puts it into a vibrant public education system. But the reality is that despite the billions, we are going backwards. Now, you would think that on the day a report as significant as this is released, that this would become a topic of conversation because there were journalists who knew this report was coming. In fact, they knew for a couple of days. So everyone in this room knew it was coming. You reckon they talked about it with Toto over dinner at the lodge? No, of course not. Did they talk about it at National Cabinet today when every one of those people, put it up again, every one of those people who have responsibility for the country and responsibility for our kids, who are spending the billions, are in charge of a system that's going backwards and has been for 15 years. The oldest heads, the newest premiers, they've all been part of a system that has screwed our kids over. And we have fallen time after time after time for the idea that apparently the way to get better education results in this country is just to fire a cannon of money. Well, the reality is that despite the hundreds of billions of dollars, despite the fact we have spent that much money, the results are terrible. And yes, there is a certain section of kids that overperform everyone else. But there's a section of kids that once they hit the ages of their teenage years, they are going backwards. Backwards to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and now 15 years ago. Yet when you had an opportunity to ask the Prime Minister, the two Chief Ministers, or all of the state premiers a question about this today, what do you think the media did? Did they ask a single question about a report that yet again shows our school system is going backwards for 15 years? No, nothing. Nothing. Nothing at dinner with Toto, nothing when they had the meeting today, no questions about it when they were together in Canberra. Now, instead, of course, the media completely fell for the announcements on the NDIS and some fiddles with some money when it comes to GST, but something as fundamental as this, for people to realise there's a problem. Now, they can't come up with a solution in a night, but I want to hear from these people that they know it's a problem. And in the same way that there is pressure on them to deliver better outcomes on the environment or the economy, that education should be part of that too. And not by telling dumb kids like me not to sit the NAPLAN tests, not to say to the dumb kids like me not to turn up where the exams will be there. Instead, we've got to make sure that we have a system that can take the brightest kid and supercharge their ability and take the slow coaches like me and bring us up to average. Part of this too is not just politicians, it's us parents. It's us as parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles and friends. While none of us like the idea of having to go back and do an extra 13 years of school on top of the 13 years of school that we did, or for many older Australians, it wasn't 13 years of school, it was a lot less than that. We have to be part of our kids' education. We have to be aware of what is in the curriculum. We have to be reading to our kids at night. We have to be spending the same time we do kicking back and watching the footy or watching fail videos, working on things that help grow their brains. It also means that when we are in a position to control the devices in our houses, that we control the devices in our houses. That while it's easier to give into, Dad, can I have your phone? The answer is no. When it's easier to give into, oh, Grandma, can I just play on the iPad? No. Unless they've done their work before, unless you've seen them read a book, unless you've seen them do something to improve their education. Yet amazingly, despite how significant this story is, this is the future of our country. And think about all of the different areas where people try to use kids in protests as a way of trying to win you over emotionally. Well, these are our kids. These are our kids, and they are not being taught, or they are not learning, or they are not understanding, or they are not remembering, or they are not comprehending the basics. And we cannot have an attitude that as long as my kids are okay, everyone else's can go jump. We have to do more. I say this as a parent right now who is at maximum involvement with making sure that my kids do better. But I've got to do better as a parent. We all have to do better as the people who push our education system. Not about whether it's too woke or not woke enough, but about whether or not the basics are being covered and what we can do to help cover the basics. Now, again, this is big news. This is a big news, big report, international report that tells us our education standards for some high school kids are going backwards and have been for 15 years. But what do you reckon the media chose to cover before they even mentioned these reports, if they mentioned them at all on their 6 p.m. bulletins? Oh, that's right, this soap opera.
With Brittany Higgins concluding her evidence of the Bruce Lehrmann defamation trial, today some of her former colleagues gave their versions.
In addition to differing stories from Lehrmann and Brittany Higgins, another has emerged of the colleagues passionately kissing hours before the alleged rape in Parliament House.
Former Liberal staffer Bruce Lehrmann has received a year's rent of $4,000 a fortnight for his exclusive media deal with the Seven Network.
What does it say about us as a media, I'm talking on this side of the television, or us as a population, that when something as significant as this goes around, that it's not asked about when you have a chance to shirt front the people that are responsible? What does it say about us that we don't put it as the priority? Oh, because it's to eat your vegetables. It's not as interesting as what may or may not have happened on that night all those years ago in Canberra. Please. Thankfully, there are those that are laser focused on this, like our mate Kevin Donnelly, the expert when it comes to kids' education. We've spoken to him how many times? Over and over and over again, and all the other shows here on Sky News, and he speaks such perfect sense. Well, he's read this thing cover to cover, so I trust what he says here. And he says, while offering a summation today, the OECD's analysis explains one of the reasons that Australia's underperformance is the high rate of disruption and lack of classroom discipline. Some 25% of students say they could not work well in class. 33% say they do not listen to the teacher. 40% admitted they were distracted while using digital devices. Now, I've told you this before. I haven't sat the test, but I'm pretty damn sure if I did, I'd be some sort of high-functioning dyslexic. You know that I forget a little bit too worked up or a little bit tired. Sometimes you start to hear me stumble as I read. But I've been lucky. I've been able to find a way through, and what a place to end up landing on your feet. But we both know that's the exception to the rule. There are adults who can't read properly or do basic maths, and there's a shame that we feel about that. A fire alarm went off today about how our kids are not taking in what they are learning. Yet there was an opportunity to look the people who have the power and the resources and the will and the connections to the unions to get a better result. And no one even asked them a question. That is a shocking state of affairs about what our priorities are. It truly is. But to what I'm sure you've all come here for tonight. Now, today, we finally got the appearance of clueless Claire O'Neill, her idiot immigration minister, Andrew Giles, and the Attorney-General of Australia, full with the plum voice and all the rest of it. And I've got to say, when I saw the three of them setting up for their press conference today, I thought of that great movie from the 80s, The Three Amigos. Remember this one?
The Three Amigos!
So I might call them Albo's useless three amigos, all right? Albo's three useless amigos, being the Attorney-General, the clueless Claire O'Neill, and, of course, the Immigration Minister. But, of course, it ain't funny what they're doing right now. Claire O'Neill has had more positions in the Kama Sutra on what the government's response actually has been to the High Court decision, yet she keeps talking tough and then ends up having to argue exactly the opposite of what she said 6 hours earlier because the talking points have changed. Andrew Giles was asked over and over again today about, well, hang on, how many of the people that are actually out and amongst us, how many of them are criminals? Oh, I can't possibly speak about any of those things. And Mark Dreyfus, of course, the Attorney-General, well, he was the one in the room who, remember, said to the Human Rights Council that their legal team could argue against the government's legal team to help get the bloke out of indefinite detention in the first place. Now, as you know, he blew up, and he blew up deluxe today. And as you also know, there's a lot of emotions going on inside him at the moment because he's most recently lost his wife. And for that, of course, we have maximum sympathy. But for obvious reasons, if there is all of this going on inside you, you just stay away from work. But he decided to turn up today, so he is allowed to be criticised. And the behaviour that you have seen time and time and time again of him ripping into our reporter is, of course, disgraceful. Now, I would say the same if somebody decided to rip into another media organisation, but guess what? This was someone in our work family, and I will defend them. Now, Olivia can defend herself. Olivia will not stop asking questions, but the treatment was, of course, all designed to intimidate her. As Peter Credlin told you a couple of hours ago, and I think this was great analysis in particular from her, which was that the reason in part why he decided to wave his finger and blast away at her was to intimidate her. Because what often happens, and I remember this from 20 years ago when I was a little radio reporter, is that if you arc up a little too much, if you upset the apple cart, all the other journalists kind of take a step back and they let you take the whipping from the politician. It's only when they agree with the issue that you are pushing, which is generally a left-wing one, and you're ripping into a Liberal politician, that they all start to work like a pack and start asking all versions of the same question. They all stand up for each other. But none of that took place in the room, couple on Twitter, but in the room when this nonsense was going on. But what was particularly worth noting about this own goal, which yet again shows us how rattled the government is right now, is that the Attorney-General carried on despite the fact that he wasn't even asked the question. The question was asked of Claire O'Neill. Claire O'Neill answered, and then he decided, yep, I'm going to go after the Sky News people because I want to give them a whack, and send a message to the rest of the press pack. Whatever the message is that's on Sky News, don't let it get out of first gear. You've seen it, but it's worth seeing again.
Do you owe an apology to those in the community that have been subjected to misdeeds by some of these individuals?
I want to suggest to you that that question is an absurd question. I will not be apologising for upholding the law. I will not be apologising for pursuing the rule of law.
And the moment was rather obvious to even clueless Claire O'Neill. For a moment she had some clarity that this was an ugly moment that everyone needed to quickly move on from. Now, no doubt by the time that you've woken up, we will hear that the Attorney-General has sent a text message in the middle of the night saying, I'm sorry. They will, of course, leak that information probably before the text has even been sent, but we'll see whether it goes the next 24 hours. But Claire O'Neill actually steps in to deal with the Attorney-General who has overreacted. And again, I get it, all the emotions that are inside, but still the moment can come where you turn around and say, look, sorry, a bit over the top, but you get what I'm trying to say here. Instead, no, it was finger-waving and intimidation in one of its worst kinds. But this happens all the time in politics, which is that if you can make the example of one person and one media organisation, then the rest of the media starts to turn around and just not quite report what will make the politicians angry. And that's exactly what happened here today, but you can hear this was a problem. And if you think it's just one we've been wrapping ourselves in for the past few hours, have a look at clueless Claire O'Neill. Even she worked out this isn't good.
And I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt. I will not be apologising. Your question is an absurd one.
Okay, I think we'll move on here. Yep.
Sent in to clean up in aisle Dreyfus was Grim Jim today, the Treasurer who was trying to tell us that 0.2% growth in the economy is a good thing. That basically is a very, very weak heartbeat in our economy. And he was asked by my friend and colleague Andrew Clennell, so, about Mark Dreyfus, have a listen to this as an attempt to cover up what we all saw as an ugly and unnecessary insight into the people that are running our country.
What do you think about Mark Dreyfus blowing up today?
I think Mark was just reflecting the frustration that the whole parliament feels about the cards that we've been dealt when it comes to the High Court decision.
Seriously? I know there's a bunch of people who all sort of sit around and come up with clever ways to change the subject. But maybe sometimes you just say, look, I spoke to Mark, and Mark's already said sorry. He's already called the reporter a storm in a teacup. And I know that Twitter will turn around and say, well, it is a storm in a teacup. The reality is it's about an insight into a wider tactic of bullying, something that we were supposedly told this government was never going to participate in, was going to be better at. And that's the chief law officer of the country. That's the bloke who wants to introduce laws that will censor the internet. He wants the capacity to be able to decide what misinformation is. And geez, I wonder which media organisation he may well end up trying to use that on, particularly in social media areas. Cheered on, of course, by the very same Twitter people who would have gone ballistic if a Liberal minister did that to somebody from the ABC. So yeah, I'm going to stick with Albo's 3 useless amigos. Because if that happens again, we'll have to find the 3 musketeers who ended up cutting themselves, no one else, but still. They deserve to be laughed at, but they also deserve to be called out. Oh yeah, and meantime, yet another broken promise from Anthony Albanese. Despite the fact that the education system has got even worse on his watch, despite the fact of cost of living and all the rest of it, but most importantly, despite the fact that, of course, there was an opportunity to step in here and pull his minister into line, none of that happened, which is not exactly what he promised when he was applying for the job.
During this campaign, I've been positive. I've been who I am. I don't pretend to be perfect. What I do though, is accept responsibility, and I step up and I won't go missing.
Well, funnily enough, when he had the opportunity to, say, go on Sky News this afternoon with Andrew Clennell, to turn up, in fact, anywhere else today, he was missing. Why? Because after dinner with the Labor premiers and the Liberal Premier of Tasmania and Toto last night, and getting away with not having to answer any questions today about education, there he was, handing out the caps for the Prime Minister's 11 game in Canberra today, a traditional thing that politicians often do. And the Prime Minister gave no interview yesterday to the media, no interview the day before, and the only interview he gave was, of course, talking about the cricket to our mates on Fox Cricket. This was the Prime Minister taking responsibility for the behaviour of his ministers and the failures of his government. Oh, that's right, no. Just trying to put coins in the good bloke account.
Latrell Mitchell's bought a home in the heart of St George. Is that a sign that he's moving on?
He's going nowhere, mate. He's going nowhere. We got Latrell, Jack Whiten coming from Canberra here. The Canberrans are still a bit upset about that. What a backline we'll have next year. Campbell Graham and Jack Whiten in the centres, Latrell at the back, Cody at 5'8". It will be an exciting year. I always think that South Sydney are certain to not lose a game at this time in the season.
Now, is a Prime Minister allowed to have fun? Yes. Is he allowed to do it on a busy day? Maybe. But when his government is in the trouble that it's in right now, to take no responsibility for the behaviour of the people around him or the failures of his government on you pick a front, that's a bloke who's just playing the role of Prime Minister. And while his office now will be secretly thinking of ways to punish Fox Cricket for what they say on Sky News, don't do that. You turn up, of course, Boxing Day test, McGrath test, good luck to you. But just make sure on the way in and out of the ground, he also does a press conference where he can talk about things like his government deciding to let all those people out. And we learned tonight that there are 4 that have now been recontacted by police about apparent and alleged crimes. As for the economy, as I said, things were very, very meagre. If you were looking at a heartbeat, it is at the moment when it comes to our economy. Now, of course, if you have negative growth for a quarter, it worries people. If you have it for 2, it's a recession. We currently have had 3 negative quarters of economic growth per capita, which means the average Australian is in a recession. But because we still export an awful lot of stuff to the rest of the world, we're just staying in positive territory, 0.2%. Hardly massive. Meantime, as I say, in suburban families, in the real world, well, there they were, in all sorts of trouble. 80% of them talking about the extreme pressures they have when it comes to cost of living. 35% of people who, of course, said that in part their tax return helps pay basic bills. And they remain furious that this Treasurer, this Prime Minister took $1,500 out of their tax returns earlier this year. Well, despite the fact that all of that remains the same, again, Jim Chalmers, afternoon agenda this afternoon, oh, everything's apparently amazing, everything's great, just have a listen to him.
But we need to remember that we've got inflation moderating, we've got wages growing, 2 consecutive quarters of real wages growth, we've got unemployment with a 3 in front of it, record participation, we've got a surplus, we've got much smaller deficits saving tens of billions of dollars in interest. And so this is why our economic plan has been broadly endorsed by the IMF, the OECD, Fitch Ratings, the RBA Governor and others.
Otherwise known as what was really playing in his head?
Oh my gosh, I love this song. Everything is awesome. Everything is cool when we're part of the team. Everything is awesome. And we're living our dream.
Just keep saying the talking points. Just keep saying the talking points. Hope nobody asks you about when you were loose around Parliament, when you were on the source. What does loose mean, sir? Well, that's right. We dealt with that in a profile piece, didn't we, where we didn't really deal with that. In the meantime, just another little example about how cost of living changes and how it changes in regional Australia, suburban Australia, the Australia that the front end of the plane could give no stuff about. Remember a few years ago when Coles had that $10 deal where you can feed your family for $10. Now, I know people have been doing this on TikTok for a little while, but still, interesting to note today, Channel 9 decided to do a version of this where they checked in the 2017 prices of feed your family under $10. What is it now? For Grand's Cottage Pie, Curtis Stone was able to whip you one up for $10 in 2017. Now it's $23. Fettuccine Bolognese, 2017, $10. Now $18.64. But as I say, why would the Prime Minister give us stuff? He's rattling around the lodge with all of his Labor mates, Toto in train. What does Chalmers care? He's going to be the next Labor Prime Minister in a government that'll go on forever because it's all Peter Dutton's fault. And of course, both of them have just got more money than ever before to pay for the cost of living. Not just because of their jobs, but because, remember, this year MPs got their biggest pay rise in a decade. You got nothing. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. We're in a good mood. Let's get straight into it right now with none other than Joe Hildebrand, Bonman Bishop, Barnaby Joyce. That's our plan for the next little while, so don't go anywhere. Thanks for watching Paul Murray Live this Wednesday night. Standing by for Barnaby Joyce in Canberra, but in the meantime, I reckon we can make it through with these two, none other than Joe Hildebrand and, of course, Bronwyn Bishop. Bronwyn, let's talk about the Dreyfus thing for a few different ways, right? And we're going to get to education, all the rest of it here. Again, I'm just echoing what Peter Credlin said a bit earlier tonight, and it's bang on, which is politicians have a very clean tactic, which is they are literally standing higher than the people that they are asking questions of. If they're able to single out a singular person, then the rest of the room kind of has the courage of all of your mates at school when they were egging you on to do something stupid, and everyone takes a little step back and you become the focus. But also, if it's relentlessly about a media organisation, then we get what happened with Daniel Andrews, which is, the Herald Sun, it's just the Herald Sun talking about it. And you're able to essentially cauterise any stories that come out or emanate from a particular place. Unless, of course, it's the ABC and everyone must cover the story.
Except when Keating said it.
Correct. And I completely understand the emotional circumstances of a bloke who lost his wife, right? That is part of the mix, and we've all got cranky and crabby, or maybe came back to work too early or had too much going on inside. But here's what anyone would do. 10 minutes after, when you've cooled down, you go in a lift, you go upstairs, you go into the office of the person that you had a whack at, and you say, look, Joe, I'm sorry, pal, there are no signs that happened today, and I don't know what communication will happen tonight. But what did you learn about the inner heart of the government today, that it happened, that it hasn't been apologised for, and that the Prime Minister has played no role in trying to smooth it over?
It's a government in absolute chaos. But I have to say this about Mr Dreyfus. Whenever I used to throw him out under 94A, even his own side were happy. He is really the personification of arrogance and thinks he is above everybody else. And so the way he behaved today didn't surprise me. But also, he's under greater pressure He's under greater pressure because they're looking into the whole question of the $2.3 million payout to Brittany Higgins, and they'll be looking at his role if they go ahead with it. He's up to his eyeballs in the mess of releasing all these people into the community when they didn't have to. They had to wait. The proper thing was to wait until the judgment reasons were published.
Correct.
Then you make the decision.
And you make it hard. You say, you know what, the other 480, or the other 147, you can all reapply one after one after one after one. Drag it out.
Well, even if you don't drag it out, the prudent thing is you wait and see what was decided, then you act upon it. But he and having conceded that the Human Rights Commission could come in, and who made the decision to admit that he couldn't be, the plaintiff couldn't be settled in some other country?
Correct.
Who gave the instruction? Which is the minister who was the instructing client?
Correct. Well,
We know none of that.
Because literally, you had the scenario, that's what I was saying before. You literally had, the chief law officer approving the use of a taxpayer-funded lawyer arguing against a taxpayer-funded
Correct.
lawyer, and of course that story then being fed back to the Guardian because the hope is it's just a News Corp thing. It's just a News Corp. These are the games, all right. You know it, but it needs to be explained.
The real intent of the left, of the socialist left, of the Labor Party, do not want to see any refugees denied entry. They want open borders.
Well, Albo himself said he couldn't turn things around. That was in 2015. Joe, now, you're in the difficult position now where I know that I know the bloke, and I know your obvious natural reaction is, for goodness sake, right? But what does it say that the defensive crouch is now so tight that even something as simple as this can't be resolved quickly? That's a really bad sign, because I know when the Morrison government, and obviously defending them up the hilt on this program, when they got into that defensive crouch and wouldn't possibly move, things that could have been solved in 5 minutes weren't solved, and they bled on for days, which were on top of the previous wounds on top of the previous wounds, and we got Albo.
Oh, look, it's Richo's golden rule, which is if you made a mistake, then own it, apologise for it, and fix it, and do it all very, very, very quickly. The public expects politicians to make mistakes. It's actually baked into the esteem in which they hold them. Make of that what you will. They expect politicians to screw up. What they don't like is being gaslighted, being told that what they're going through or what they're seeing with their own eyes isn't actually happening or isn't actually as bad as they think. With the having a go at the journo, I take an extremely dim view of this. I tore Paul Keating a new one when he attempted to do the same
thing
at the National
the
Press
same
Club.
reporter, the same organisation, the same person. Geez, I wonder if they worked around as a target.
And always a young woman too.
Correct.
I mean, whatever happened to that? Perhaps it shouldn't matter, but they say it matters, and now they're doing it too. I think it's an incredibly ugly look. The first thing I did think of course, was that his wife has just died a month ago, and he must be going through an incredible amount of pain. Sure. So I'm terribly sorry for that.
But that's what I'm saying. So in 10 minutes, that's how you turn around.
Well, we've
all come back to work too early after something.
Well, so when you played the Chalmers thing and said, well, why didn't he just say, oh, look, I've spoken to Mark, he's gone and apologised to the journalist. And I thought, oh my God, did that happen? Thank Christ. Finally, they're doing something right.
No, it didn't.
And I go and check all my sources again.
No,
so
I
hadn't seen it, check all the stories, because I hadn't heard about it. And I think, oh, how did I miss this? And of course, it didn't actually happen.
Correct.
And look, again, this is a government that I think is telling itself that everything's okay when it's not. Yeah. It is telling itself, I imagine, that everything is just a Sky After Dark conspiracy
100%.
when it is not. That's 100%. How opposition to The Voice started out, and look how that turned
100%.
out. And I think it needs to face facts. But I will say, on education, Jason Clare, you won't see him in a scandal anytime soon, because he's getting down and
No, so let's get to schools, all right? Let's get to a more important issue, right? The OECD report, it's similar to NAPLAN result. I mean, how many reports do we need to stack on top of each other that tell us exactly the same thing? That regardless of the endless cycle, most notably Gonski, all the rest of it now, and we've seen a school generation go through after Gonski, right? That money isn't always the answer. Something that the OECD has told us about before is that classroom discipline is part of the question. Now, one thing that the Labor Party can absolutely do if it wants to, when it has basically coast-to-coast control and the federal government and the unions that are in place to change the way the classroom, is to own the issue. But instead, they'll just turn up at the school when it's election time, and parents will turn around and fall for it rather than holding them accountable. Every side, every government, 15 years backwards. It doesn't have to be like this.
Socialists always like the populace to be undereducated. They're easier to control. And that's why you look at every socialist regime.
And then miraculously,
this
the
is
same
not a
people that want to
socialist
decriminalise the
regime.
drugs. They want to decriminalise the drugs. Keep your dumb, keep your
Someone
drug.
at home playing a Brodwood Bishop says socialist
the
drinking
trot.
game because they'd be absolutely sloshing.
It's Albo the Trot.
It's Albo
That's
the ex-trot.
He's Albo the Trot
No,
who likes
he's grown a lot.
voting
He's
trade.
matured.
He has not.
He's
And
been
even
great.
you can't go on.
He's
to
going through. He's doing the stage 3 tax cuts. That's
I
not
thought you were
trotty.
telling me he's
Okay,
going through
about
the mail
education.
managers.
Because people, I'm saying, when people are rageful and they're scared, and I mean, we all know this, right? We know it about our own family or our country. We want our kids to be better. And as I said, there's many reasons about this, right? It's our role as parents, grandparents, family, friends, fine. But it's also about basic things like school discipline, and we don't have it.
But why are you surprised? Why are you surprised? It is so
I'm not, I'm
heavily,
pissed off.
It is so heavily unionised. I fought against there being such a thing as a national curriculum because I figured if you had 8 different jurisdictions, somebody might get it right.
A bit of competitive
And
federalism. As they did in Western Australia for a little while, remember?
Yeah, but I mean, the problem is that it's being dumbed down. And what are the kids being taught? They're being taught that your culture, that your civilization is bad, it's wrong, that you have to apologise, that you can't be proud of your nation. And anyway, what's the point? Because you're all going to boil from global warming. Why would you think that the kids would put the effort into trying to get learning when they're being taught nothing but...
There are some elements of that, but those sort of culture war issues is just one very small part of it. I'll tell you, and I've spent many, many months and years looking into this. I've been to these schools. I've been to schools that are doing a fantastic job, and I'll tell you...
So have I.
And they do it. And they do it with discipline. I'm not talking about the private schools here. I'm talking about public schools in Western Sydney. And the first thing they do is discipline. The first thing they do is make sure all the kids are wearing the right uniforms with their shirt tucked in, because that feeds into other notions of self-esteem and applying yourself. And if you look the part, then you start to act the part.
Jordan Peterson, make your bed every day.
That's right.
So
and again, that is a good that's Granville Boys High, right? So that's a really
let's
good
go back and have teachers' colleges.
Let's do it everywhere. But another part of the problem, right, is that we have. My mum went to a teachers' college. I know exactly what you're talking about. But another part of the problem is that we have a shortage of teachers, and teachers are not spending enough time in the classroom before they graduate and before they go into the thing.
When you had teachers' colleges.
That's right, but they don't have.
So we need to go back.
But we
to
don't have enough people in teaching in the first place anyway. That's the problem.
Okay, but
why would you choose to go into a profession which is going to slam you by the unions?
That is why. Well, that's why the campaign I led
and so
started.
Why are we seeing coming out of schools, seeing this pro-Palestinian marches? Why?
Yeah, well, that is obviously ridiculous and disgraceful. But leaving that as and again, Prue Card, Labor Minister, has been very strong on that, and she's been good on that.
But the Prime Minister hasn't been.
The problem is
that's the problem. There's no
the states run the schools,
but he runs the country. But he doesn't, you see. Where is he today?
Toto runs the dinner,
The teachers going out with Palestinian flags on, scarves on, was just ridiculous, obviously. But
it wasn't ridiculous, it was shameful.
Yeah, I said that already. What word? You just give me the adjective, I'll say it, and then we can move on.
Joe, you like to think you've got a good grasp of English. Choose your words better.
If you're a teacher,
and tell me,
you know what your teacher would have just written back. Then she would have said, "Show working."
I think I previously said it was disgraceful.
All right.
We can roll back the tape.
Okay,
But it was disgraceful. It was shameful. It was ridiculous. But the point being is, there's a shortage of teachers, and therefore the teachers we have are being rushed into the system. They're not getting the skills they need to manage the classrooms, and therefore they're getting burnt out because they're losing control of the classroom. Therefore, they're quitting in the first 5 years in record numbers, and the whole cycle continues.
I almost want a yes/no on this, but I know it's a little longer. Do you agree with me about parental, grandparental and community involvement in our kids as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it does feel that there's a lot of people who think that, great, I've got them ready, drop them off, and you've dropped them off with the mechanics, and the mechanics sort of fixes them for the 8 hours a day, and then your job's to drive around a ballet. It's like, no offence to ballet dancing or anything else. Like, do all that stuff with our kids. Yeah. What I'm saying is that we need to do more as parents to sit and read. I feel this because I've got literally...
I'm one of those.
Year 3, kindergarten, right? We're like the You're going to hear about this a lot time. I'm going to be around for every day of their education, if nothing else, to be able to fight back on telly about it. All right, I'm going to take an early break here. I'm going to call an audible because we've got a chance on Barnaby Joyce. He's in and out of the House right now as they're trying to finish off the final votes in and around the immigration legislation. If we can get him back, we will. Otherwise, again, I reckon we'll be okay. Quick break. Back with more here in a moment's time on Paul Murray Live this Wednesday night. Thanks for watching. Sorry, no Barnaby tonight. He is, of course, locked up inside what they're doing inside the lower house, but the former Speaker of the lower house is here. Future member of the lower house is here. Good to see. All right, we're going to be in Port Lincoln Sunday night. Cannot wait to be there. I've got a big plan for what we're going to be doing all day Saturday, but I'll give you the tip. It involves shark and shark food, all right? But we'll be there Sunday night if you want to join us. It's ourtown@skynews.com.au, ourtown@skynews.com.au. But as you know, the lasting legacy we want to do of our Town shows is to raise money for the Humpty Dumpty Foundation. Now, amazingly, despite how much tax and government, but that's another issue, there are little sick bubbers, little sick kids, when they go into intensive care in local hospitals, a lot of the stuff's donated, and it's donated through the Humpty Dumpty Foundation. I want to be able to leave a lasting legacy, so we want to try to get to about $47,000 worth of donations. We've already got quite a significant number already, but please, if you can help us out, you can do it tax deduction. Put it this way, if you're thinking about that, what are we getting behind as the charity for Christmas for the family? What about this one? Jump on the phone as well if you can. 1300 486 789. Pause the telly. I'll still be here on the other side. 1300 486 789, or please go to humpty.org.au/regional fundraiser. The simple fact is, Port Lincoln is a 7-hour drive away from Adelaide. If your kid is sick, I want them to be able to stay in Port Lincoln for as long as possible, exactly as we did with Mildura and exactly as we'll do with all the places we go next year. I thank you for everyone who has donated, and I ask desperately, without begging, for you to help us when it comes to Port Lincoln and everywhere else that's coming up. It'd be really good. All right, so Joe Bronwyn, let's go to speed round now. The federal government seems to believe that the inquiry into Woolies and Coles will end up having the same effect as the bashing of the former boss of the Reserve Bank or the devil horns on Alan Joyce, which will somehow get them out of the world of the cost of living things. Of course, the Greens want it all to happen, so we will have a day in the next few weeks in the lead up to Christmas where fingers will be wagged at a CEO. Will it change a damn thing?
No, because the federal government has absolutely no power to fix any prices.
Correct.
Simply true. And furthermore, I find that the way the government is trying to play the political angle of this, what's this business about the Christmas ham?
Oh, yes.
Did he pick ham to insult certain people?
Yeah. Oh,
deliberately?
okay.
Was there something wrong with turkey?
Perhaps he was attracted to ham because that's his parliamentary performance style. Can we roll the tape? This is about as hammy as it gets. This is your federal government trying to do something about inflation, which is not do anything about inflation.
And that's why today I've called on the big supermarket chains to freeze the price of Christmas hams. The traditional ham, I'm surprised that the opposition don't think that's a good idea. Sneering at the idea of freezing the price of Christmas hams.
Order.
How concerned about cost of living you are. Well, the opposition might be surprised to hear this, but the traditional ham is a staple of any Christmas lunch in Australia. I would have thought you would have known that. It's time for supermarkets to do their part and say one thing we won't put up is the price of a Christmas ham. Guaranteeing a price freeze on ham would allow families to manage their budgets in the weeks leading up to the holiday. And I really would have thought that this is something that the opposition could get behind, but apparently not. It's always politics for them, not caring about the average Australian citizen who's trying to save some money.
I tell you,
Joe, I love you. So you don't even have to defend that. That's rubbish.
I went into the supermarket and saw it was $8 a kilo. That's pretty good.
It is. The truth, I again, this is something
don't even
I'm
try.
obsessed by. No. Because I actually just wrote a yarn today about. So I've been for ages calling for unions and government and business to sit down and come up with some kind of new wages and prices accord to control inflation.
For a very long time.
So you say to the supermarkets, and you don't bash them up for it like Nick McKim wants to do. Goes, let's go smash them. You know what? If you want to smash someone, they're probably not going to do what you say.
100%.
But go sit down with them, saying, listen, this is a really great way for you to look like the great corporate Australians that you're always saying you are. great way to demonstrate it. You made bumper profits during COVID. Why not just absorb some of these price rises and not pass them on? Today, the SDA, in a yarn that was written by an incredibly handsome Daily Telegraph journo, the SDA called on something similar, called on the supermarkets to pass on all the savings they achieved through checkout chick cuts or checkout operator cuts and automated self-serve checkouts, to pass on all those savings to either better wages for employees or, more importantly, perhaps lower prices for customers. So if you sit down and have those sort of sensible conversations,
and that's 100% true. But
so
if you're trying to pay the power bill of the supermarket, it is already going up by the best part of 20%. If you are paying the heavy haulage tax that was introduced by Jim Chalmers, it's going to... So I agree with you as an idea about everyone finding a way.
And I want them to make profits, but they can absorb some short-term...
But if the government wants to really bring down the cost of Christmas hams, you know what they could do with petrol, you know what they could do with heavy haulage taxes. All right, 2 minutes for a very big issue.
Sounds like Wayne
The Ombudsman in Victoria is truly fearless and has had her budget cut by the Labor government multiple times. She came out with a report which is many months in the making, and it is all about grey corruption. It is the business model of that version of the Labor Party in Victoria. It is also being practiced by the version of the Labor Party in Queensland, which is we're around forever, don't question anything we do, slowly but surely move people from things like the Premier's office to the upper echelons of the police force, and then eventually the tentacles are in everything and nobody says no. Or at least that's what I interpreted her report to be. Here she is.
A culture of fear in the upper echelons of the public sector does not support frank and fearless advice. The fear factor was certainly disturbing. We found the Premier had roughly as many staffers as the Prime Minister, New South Wales Premiers combined. Creeping politicisation is a reality in Victoria and requires urgent attention.
Now, this is sober, serious stuff, but let's be clear. When there was police corruption issues in New South Wales, there was a Royal Commission that turned into a standing Royal Commission, right? System had to be changed. Now, this Victorian government is never going to call a Royal Commission into itself, but essentially that's the situation that's happening right now in Victoria, that if you have the government involved in everything, then nobody is pushing back on what the government is doing. And when it's as party political as it is, it's pretty crook, Joe. It gets pretty crook pretty fast.
It is, and I'll preempt Bronwyn here and say this is what happens when the socialist left actually is in charge, and it is very sad to see. But in both Queensland and Victoria, you have socialist left Labor governments. Even though Anastasia Palaszczuk is technically a member of the right, the left have the numbers, and they basically run her. And the first thing that they seem to do is to act like a sort of Soviet state. So they freeze out all the free media they don't like, refuse to cooperate them. This extends even to the ABC or certain ABC programs in Victoria, let alone, you know, poor old Neil Mitchell or, you know, elements of the Herald Sun. And
So
then they do their own, they basically run their own Pravda.
So, Bronwyn, I have a semi-solution here, which is they do not control the upper house. Yes, the Greens are the ones, and the Greens are even worse than Labor. There is an opportunity to do something from that upper house. The people who choose not to do it are the people you have to put last at the bottom every single time. Guys, we're out of time. Thank you very much. See you again for our final week of the year next year, where it's presents for everyone. And eggnog on socialist references. I love it. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. $14,420. That is how many people have. That is how much people have donated to help us with Humpty Dumpty. These are some of the people who have done so far. Thank you to every single person who has done so. Many people do so anonymously. Lots of businesses have also chipped in. I appreciate it. I know I'm talking about it a lot, but it's because it's a cause that doesn't just mean a lot to me. But I really want to leave this as a lasting legacy, monument, gift. From our time in Port Lincoln this Sunday. Call them 1300 Humpty, 1300 486 789. See you on the show tomorrow night. Plenty to talk about, including the great Dave Rubin. Here's the late debate.